Herzlich willkommen zum Musotalk, dem Music- und Sound-Production-Podcast aus Berlin.
Hallo und herzlich willkommen zum musotalk Spezial von der Superboost 2016 in Berlin. Und jetzt habe ich Gelegenheit, endlich das Interview führen zu können, was ich schon immer machen wollte, nämlich mit dem Erfinder der Emo SP1200 zu sprechen. Und schließlich bin ich Germany's greatest SP1200 fan. Hi Dave.
Hi.
I'm so happy and delighted to meet you finally, yeah, because as I told you before when we were doing the other video, I'm probably Germany's greatest SP1200 fan. I need to know everything about how you made that machine.
Well, I'm probably the guy to ask then. It was a long time ago, but I can search my memory and do my best to answer your questions.
Okay, because just tell you what I already know. I think it was a product that you designed on your own, mostly, and it got 3 or 4 revisions and got many lives. Yeah. How can you explain what was the motivation to do it? Obviously, you wanted to do a better product than the drumulator and whatever was there, but you know, tell. I'm so confused because I've been waiting to do this interview for 10 years. So tell me all about it.
Okay, well let's start with the beginning. The drumulator was a successful product for EMU. It really put us on the map, and it was our first relatively low-cost product. And as competition developed, we knew we needed to develop another product. We wanted to develop something that had more sophistication than the drumulator. We specifically wanted better fidelity, and everyone wanted pitch shifting. But on the other hand, there was a very definitely a price point that we had to hit. So our competition at that time, Roger Lynn was designing what became the Lynn 9000, and we had heard through the grapevine it was going to be a 16-bit machine, and at that point, that was really a very expensive proposition. It was going to be a very high-end machine, and as a result, we decided we would not try and go all the way to 16-bit, but instead stick with a 12-bit linear coding. The drumulator was instead a companded 8-bit coding, but we felt that the 12-bit coding actually sounded pretty good with the drum samples. People wanted the capability of storing their own samples. That was something that the drumulator couldn't do. So that was
because at the time we had the DX, the Oberheim stuff was coming out, and it was all EPROMs. I remember we had to find an EPROM copier to get a new bass drum sound and whatever. And RAM was so expensive; it was unbelievable.
Right, and we're in the emulator business back then as well, so we knew the wonderful economics of the RAM market in general, that was going to keep coming down in price. So when we designed the SP1200, I had the manufacturing and purchasing guys breathing down my neck saying, "Are we going to make any money on this? Are we going to make any money on this?" Then I insisted that we put in the relatively large amount of RAM that we did.
384 kilobytes.
Right, exactly. And pushed the limit on that to the point where we weren't going to make a lot of money in the first few months when we shipped it. But we knew that, at least I insisted that we would know that the price would come down and come down and come down, and it would ultimately be profitable. So the pitch shifting, we did what's called drop sample pitch shifting. I wouldn't do it for the emulator line because it didn't sound good with musical instruments. But as we played with it with the drums, it really was quite acceptable. And I think that's one of the features that it sort of surprised me how greatly the musicians embraced it and really made use of it. That's sort of an aside, I've got to say. I'm not a musician myself. I was born with musical talents, but because my father didn't like music, I never developed them. So I've always been fascinated by music. I've always had a good ear, but never learned to play any instrument with any competence at all. But I'm always just fascinated with, when I design an instrument, the amazing things that the musicians do with it that are things that I never dreamed they would do. I think that's part of being artistic, as you look at your instrument or your medium, whatever it is, and merge your art with your medium to do something magical. That, to me, that's just one of the wonderful things in life.
It turns out that all the limitations that were imposed due to price and development in general, that they now make this machine so incredibly popular.
Exactly, and that's what I love. Now the SP1200 in particular, I think that was a real innovation, being able to put the disk drive in the machine. That made everybody's life a lot easier. You can now
We had the 12 with the Commodore disk drive. Oh man, 30 minutes I think loading time.
Yeah, it was horrible. Again, we did that for cost reasons, and that was what we could afford at the time. And then, like the price of RAM, the price of disk drive suddenly dropped. We had the capability of getting a disk drive for well under $100, and that meant that we could squeeze it into the product. And at the same time, we also then were able to shift from the static RAM to the dynamic RAM, because you could load it every time you turned the thing on, and that compensated for some of the price of the disk drive as well.
And another key feature musically is the different outputs with the different filters and everything. So I keep playing around, sticking it in a different output, using a different output. And especially also when I use this single output mix, I shift the instruments around to different outputs because of the different output filtering.
Yeah, and that filtering, we actually began with just individual fixed filters in the drumulator, and realized how important and how that really did have a very significant effect on the character of the sound. Now in the SP12, as I remember, we were able to put our SSM 2044 filter dynamically on several of the channels, and that was a wonderful sounding filter. It's again one of my favorite sounding filters, and so I was very pleased.
Warm and fat.
Exactly, it's warm and fat and clean, and it just it has a good sound to it, and
you know what I like is whenever I sample something, sample is good. And it is good, and it's always good. Yes, sample is good. I like that.
Yeah, I've forgotten what all is in the software. Actually, it's quite interesting. We referred to the SP1200 at EMU as the product that refused to die. The marketing projections were always, this will taper off in a few more months, and it didn't. And it will taper off in a few months, and it didn't.
And it got reissued.
Right. Well, yeah, we finally just ran out of all the parts, and so we stopped making them. And the demand just stayed there and stayed there and stayed there. And so we did a reissue with a whole team that did reverse engineering. I was less involved with that. I did design some circuitry for the reissue, but there's actually a picture of me that I think is available online. I'm wearing a T-shirt that has a picture of a dinosaur on it, and it says Jurassic Parts SP1200 Revival, because the trick for a lot of it was finding the parts to be available 3 or 4 years after the product was discontinued.
I had my magic moment. We used the SP1200 really. I don't even know. It must be. When did it come out?
Let's see. It came out the same time my son was born, so it would be 1983.
It must have been 83. Well, no, we had the turbo.
Yeah, so 83 or maybe 84. Yeah, my son was born in February 84, and it was just 3 months after he was. So it was New Orleans of NAMM, the only NAMM they ever held in New Orleans, a great music town. It was, everybody hated the show, but we were riding high because the SP12 was then the SP12. It came out and people just embraced it. It immediately was a success, which also kind of surprised us with all the competition. We just hit all the factors, the price and everything right.
Germany was unbelievably expensive. But we started actually already at that time, sample guitars and use a gritty sound, make it really sort of things. And then we were in a studio when I was here in Berlin already, and I was also a big MP3 3000 user. I was doing techno, and I was using MP3 3000 as a sequencer and drum machine, and which is quite good suited for techno. And then I had a cooperation with a guy who was producing hip hop. And we tried it on the MP3 3000, it was okay. And then he came in with his 1200, and immediately it sounded like real vintage, gritty, authentic hip-hop.
Yeah, and the hip-hop thing caught us completely by surprise. We had no clue that was happening, but I think it's really phenomenally cool that it did. I just again shows you make an instrument and people discover it for a kind of music, and it just fits. Anyway, I was just remembering that I didn't quite finish. I was telling you about the reissue of the SP1200, so I'll switch back in gears a little bit. The thing I was going to tell you is when we did that reissue, we'd lost the source code to the thing. So EMU no longer has the source code. It actually hasn't had it for 20 years. Nobody knows exactly what.
It's Z80 assembler.
That's correct. If anybody wants to ever revive it, you're going to have to do reverse engineering from the original code there. We get lots of requests when people hear about Rossum Electro. They want to know, are we going to reissue the SB1200? And we certainly have talked about it. I won't make any definitive statement one way or the other. I love the instrument. I'd love to see it come back. As I told you in my previous interview, what I love doing is inventing. Yes. So I don't simply want to, spend a lot of time doing the research to just.
You've done your job, It's
exactly. But I'd love to see it come back. So there's a handful of different ways that we see it may be able to be resurrected and become more available to more people.
I did some non-scientific tests, because one thing that I always found is, whenever I'm on a computer, I'm on a Cubase or Pro Tools or whatever, and I do the drum programming, I never get a good feel out of it. It's really hard work to make it feel. So when I'm at the SP1200, whatever I do, it always grooves. There's always a certain groove and feel and magic instantly. Okay, it's got only one style, but that style is great and unique. And I've tried to find out what it is. And at the beginning I thought, it's because the computer is maybe not perfect in time because all the USB ports that it's asking for and all that other stuff. And so I analyzed the timing of the computer versus the SP1200. But I found, no, there's a certain jitter in the SP1200. Is that correct?
There shouldn't be very much. There is going to be a little bit. I mean, it's just
2 or 3 milliseconds.
Probably around. I would guess 2 is probably a good number. Later on, we did some accurate measurements with drummers and found that drummers really can do better than 1 millisecond accuracy if they're really good. That's the mark of a professional drummer. At that point, we thought we had a little more leeway than that. So as we designed it, we probably had, like I say, a couple of milliseconds would have been, in our knowledge at that point, considered acceptable.
The output is multiplexed, is it? So it's only one converter that also goes. Is maybe that kind of the magic that, because the bass drum is on channel 1, it's maybe first always. So, like there's a certain logic in the rhythm for a musician, for a drummer, So when you program a beat, there are certain beats that need to be the first. So your bass drum, you would like to, whatever, hit first and all. If the rest isn't that on the spot, on the timing, it's not that bad, but you need a certain priority. Is there a priority?
Well, you're right about it being multiplexed, that the times come out in slots. That's happening at the sample rate, so it's much tighter than a millisecond. That's down around probably the 50 microsecond range in there. So you're not going to get discernible jitter from that. But you might get some kind of an effect. I'm just hypothesizing here, because all of the sampling is being done by what we call the microcontroller in there. So the Z80 issues a command, and that command is going to jitter around a little bit depending on what the Z80 has to do between the time you press the button and the time the output came out. Once that goes into the microcontroller, of course, that's going to be aligned with this multiplexing. So there might be a little bit of a subtlety there that it is amazing what people can and can't hear. I'm always surprised at what they can hear. It's always measurable. I mean, there's nothing magic about our hearing, but the magic thing about our hearing is that it's so darn good.
Yeah, because sometimes I have a lot of discussion about latency and timing problems, and people say, "Oh, it doesn't matter who can hear 3 milliseconds." I say, "No. The ear is extremely precise because otherwise we wouldn't have a stereo sound, a three-dimensional sound feeling, because just this distance between the two ears is enough to make us be able to, find out if the sound is coming from behind or from that direction."
The accuracy by which you can locate sound is down to about 1 or 2 degrees. People can throw basketballs to a direction of a sound quite accurately and make the basket. But the other thing that my college training was as a biologist. And so, of course, I'm quite well versed in evolution and the survival advantage of being able to hear that tiger coming at you 1 or 2 milliseconds before the tiger makes the jump is very important. So that does explain why the human perception is so incredibly accurate. And in particular, you're absolutely right that latency is an exceedingly critical parameter that I've been working some my job before I started Rossum Electro. I was working in the cell phone market, and there the latency in that system was extremely critical. I'm also Rossum Electro has Universal Audio, the pro audio company, as one of our investors, and I work with the people there as well. And in pro audio, similarly, people have realized that we used to always use linear phase filters for our converters because they made the waveforms prettier, but they have much greater latency. And now people are realizing, no, the latency is the bigger problem. The linear phase doesn't really matter. So latency, people are becoming aware how critical that is. And it's kind of fun in the Eurorack market, getting back to what I'm doing now, because it's all real-time and analog interfaced. Once again, latency is a very king factor, absolutely key factor in everything we're doing. But I think you're right, getting back to the SP1200, that the little subtle timing differences are going to give that's what gives an instrument its feel.
And it can be annoying if it's not, you hit the sweet spot.
Right.
Probably by accident, it just happened. And I played around with the Roland R8. You remember that machine? And that has a very ugly timing. Really, I mean, this is a drum machine that just doesn't groove, whatever you do with it. And it drove me mad, this machine. And it's probably when we measure it, and people measured a couple of drum machines, and yes, it says, oh yeah, it has a very big jitter, like 5 or 8 milliseconds, which is gigantic. Yeah. So we do, it's not just in our mind, I think we can really tell. And I think that the timing is slightly different from the main output than when using single outputs. Could that be possible, or is it mixed down?
It is mixed down. That's
just a mix. There shouldn't be no timing difference.
Yeah. I can't see there being any timing difference there.
The sound is a bit more.
Yeah, there might be some timbral difference there. It's an analog amplifier. You're going to get analog effects there. So there could be something there. It'd be relatively subtle, but it certainly is not beyond believing that you would hear something there.
And what I'm really surprised is that it's a sampling percussion drum machine without an analog to digital converter. How did you do that?
Well, it has an A to D converter in there. It's just it's integrated into the D to A converter. So it was just some clever work there to make it as efficient as possible.
And that's the reason why I can't hear the sampling through the machine, right?
Probably. That one I'd have to look at.
I found a question that you cannot answer. Great.
Yeah, I have gone back. People, I get emails every so often with questions about the SP1200, and the schematics are available, so I can go back and poke. Oh yeah, I did that. Why did I do? Oh, I remember why I did that, and so on. So.
Surprisingly, I owned 4 machines. Now I have one that is like out of the box. I mean, it's mint, And what is surprising is that they all work. I mean, they all worked. There was no sort of issue, maybe only with the knobs, all the mechanical stuff, but never with the electronics. Why is that?
Well, I suspect it's just that by that time we'd built enough drum machines, we were getting pretty good at making them. EMU was always very quality conscious, from the very beginning in the modular world.
Well, I had an Emax.
Yeah, well, we did have some problems there, but we ironed them out. I mean, the Emax, the main problem that I remember was it was relatively new for us to be using the smaller disk drives, and we mounted them on a piece of metal that could bend very slightly, and the disk drives were not robust to that. And so that was where you get the it won't load off the disk drive problem. That was the main problem that I recall with the Emax. But Emax was, it was a step for us. We're trying to go down market, trying to compete with Ensoniq.
I love the sound. It's great.
Yeah, that was my first digital chip. My first big digital chip was the E-chip, and
This was the first sampler on a chip?
Yeah, well, Ensoniq had done a sampler on a chip, but they were using the drop sample, the same algorithm that we use in the SP12 for perfect pitch shifting. But for musical instruments, you really hear the artifacts a lot more. And so we were using an oversample technique in the E-chip that we had a much nicer sound overall.
Yeah, but because we had at the time it was a Roland S50 was at the same time, and the Roland always, if you would just hear the solo piano, you would say, oh yeah, this sounds great, and then you would go over to the Emax and it would sound kind of tinny, this sort of thing. But in the mix, the Roland would disappear while you'd always hear the Emax, and with all your products, it's always that they have this musicality, that just sticks through. You just know exactly what timbres you have to hit to really make it a music instrument.
Yeah, exactly.
By design or by accident?
Well, it's certainly a little bit of both. In the Emax, that chip was like I say, designed really to bring down the cost, get what we thought would be a quality product, and we had to make some compromises there. And you're right, that kind of tinny sound is a result of, rather than doing, the true accurate interpolation, the later generation, the G-chip products were beautifully clean that way. The Emax was a little dirty that way, but the other thing, you're right, that frequently that just becomes quite musical.
And it uses a strange kind of compression, 8-bit equivalent sort of thing?
Yeah, it's a...
Compression, right?
Yeah, it is a compression. It's a differential companding thing. Same thing we used, it was basically a digital implementation of the same thing the Emulator 2 used. So
it was 10-bit equivalent to 12.
No, it was an 8-bit. And it's somewhere between 12... No, the Emulator 1 was probably an 8 equivalent to 10 type of thing. The LS bit on the Emulator 1 was about 12 bits down. But it was, when we discovered the differential companding technology that we used in the Emulator 2, that was way better in terms of fidelity than the Emulator 1. The Emulator 1 fidelity was really pretty.
I remember sadly my EMU 3. Oh, what a beautiful sampler.
Yeah, that the Emulator 3 and then the follow-on generations, the E3X and so on, where we started using the G-chip. That G-chip was a real step forward in technology. But, again, after finishing the SP12-1200, my next real big project was the G&H chips that came out in the synthesizers, and I was so fixed on the fidelity there, and yet people are loving the SP12 and 1200, and I'm going, but that's 12-bit linear, and then
it's not about the specs, Dave.
Exactly. That's always the lesson, is that it's not about the specs. It is how it sounds. So and we've always got more to learn in that respect. So that's why I say there's certainly quite a bit of luck as well involved in that. But like everywhere else in the world, you make your own luck to a certain degree.
Yeah, and for me, the SP1200 has got a kind of a personality. It's more like an instrument, it's not a tool.
Right.
It's more an instrument, and it gives you something of its own. Like a lot of people, that's what people like about the whole analog stuff. They think, yeah, but I get this, it's exactly the original, but it's more because there's something added, you know, and that's what the SP1200 gives you. You know, it's your sample is good. You know, whatever you put in there, bass drum goes boom. Sample is good. Yeah, it's good. And so, I did a couple of tracks just on the 10 seconds of the machine, just to max it out, you know, see what I can do with it. Not hip-hop, something else. I talked to you about it already, more like 20th centuries glam rock. Yeah, what else can I ask? The problem with the disk drives. I have a whole box of disk drives me and my friend bought to try out, to figure out which ones are recognized by the software. What is the dilemma there?
Oh, that's hard. So you're looking at different drives, because we designed our own disk interface. So it doesn't use any of the standard formats. So we made our own format. It was optimized for sampling type applications, so that disk drives normally have sectors around the disk, so that you can get little pieces of information. But when you're loading a bank of samples, it's a huge amount of information. So we said, forget all this information that's for the sectoring. We'll record.
That's why you cannot catalog and add 2 songs or 3 songs on one drive. Right. You have to use one disc, one song. That's it.
Right. Because we got the entire bank structure there, but it let us get more information on a single disc, and simply won't talk at the slightly different rates that we're talking about, and so on.
So it's not something we suspected. It was something in the firmware or in the software that was actually looking for a certain type of drives. That's
no. To my knowledge, that's not in there at all. I don't think we would have done that. I don't see any reason to have done that.
So you have to keep on, trying out, oh, I've got a drive. Okay, let's try it. Yeah. We finally got 2 or 3 spares.
That's good. I know that people have finally reverse engineered our format and so on, which is fine.
There's a USB drive.
I've seen at least one product where you can replace the whole drive with something that simulates it pretty well. I thought that was a quite clever idea.
Absolutely.
And I think it's very cool that people were able to figure that out, because we never published those specs. At this point, again, I'd be happy to share anything I know about it to somebody who wants to, but it's no longer secret or proprietary. But
it must make you really, really proud that your product has sort of defined a whole genre.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. My son and my wife. It's like I sort of point out one of the recording. I don't know which one issued his compendium of all his albums was in a box the shape of an SP1200, and I thought that was so cool. I said, "Look, your dad is famous."
Definitely. Well, thank you very much for the interview.
Oh, you're very welcome. It's really been a pleasure.
Me too. Thanks.